80% of all car sales being automatic. That is amazing, from being about maybe under 10%.
There is a sort of very interesting sort of trivia bit here. There was a Lamborghini, I'm forgetting which one, which also had an AMT, right?
The Aventador.
The Aventador.
It's called an AT.
Yeah.
And a typical automatic, D-automatic transmission.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Like the OG automatic transmission.
True.
So to speak.
Interestingly, eCVT, it's electronically, or electrical, some call them. It's actually very funny because it's not really a CVT.
When you're driving, let's say fast, or in terms of, let's say, sheer sportiness.
Right.
I think for enthusiasts, nothing like a twin clutch. Hello, it's all about automatic transmissions. That's what we are going to be discussing today in our weekly podcast, Deep Drive, powered by Kotak Mahindra Prime. I'm Hormazd Sorabjee.
And I'm Sergius Barretto. And yes, Hormazd, automatic transmissions, very interesting topic. It is obviously increasing, we know that. But before we get into the nitty-gritties and into the gear oil, let's do a little bit of history. Because I'm sure you know this. Which was India's first automatic car? I mean, we know now they're very popular. Almost every segment has this. But which was India's first automatic, and have you driven it?
Well, I haven't driven it,
Okay.
but I know which one it is.
So now I'm intrigued.
It is the Maruti 800, actually.
Oh, wait. I thought it was the Zen.
No, it wasn't. Technically, it was the Maruti 800, but you couldn't buy it, and you should be happy you couldn't buy it, because it was an automatic which only people, with disabilities at that time could buy it.
Okay.
So, because automatics at that time, were convenient for, for hand controls and stuff like that. So, I think Maruti you had to apply, you had to get a permit.
Okay.
And if you did, you could get a Maruti 3-speed auto, which wasn't there in the market. You couldn't go to a showroom and buy it. It was just for, people which had these special needs.
So the Maruti 800.
The Maruti 800 was technically the first automatic, but it wasn't you could just go into a showroom and buy. And then I think it took a good 10 years for the first, let's say, automatic, which was just open to
reach the showroom,
to the car buying public in the showroom, and that was the Zen.
Right.
I think it was 97, thereabouts, where it came with a 3-speed auto again. So if you look at it, Maruti has actually pioneered automatics in the country. And not only that, they were the first who even brought the most popular form of automatic, which is the most basic form,
affordable,
which is the AMT, or the automated manual transmission.
Right.
That sort of democratized automatic transmissions. And I think we first saw that on the Celerio.
Right.
And again, it was, let's say, the most affordable two-pedal option that there was. And today, we've seen everyone's got AMT. So I think, in that sense, Maruti has been pioneering automatics in some way, shape or form. It may not be having the best automatics, but at least, they were the first out there. And really, the 800 technically was the first car to have it.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, if you run this trivia thing, I'm sure people would say probably the Rover Montego or the Standard 2000.
I thought the Montego would have it, and I thought even the
800 is very interesting.
That's right. Yeah, I don't even think I think I remember driving the Standard 2000. It was very much a manual gearbox at that time. Had an hydraulic clutch, but
Right.
So and quite unreliable, that too.
Right.
But I think as far as automatics go, it was the
Maruti.
Absolutely.
So let's, almost in that case, let's just start with automatics, our chat today. Let's start with the AMT, right? Like you said, it's democratized gearboxes, automatic gearboxes, very affordable tech. And maybe just to explain the basics of an AMT is that it's a manual transmission.
Sergius, I think, giving a good lesson on how it works.
Right.
Absolutely. As you said, a manual transmission with, let's say, a computer over there which kind of does all the automatic shifting for you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a computer there. There's solenoids that. So basically, when you press a clutch, instead of you pressing a clutch, there's a solenoid pressing the clutch. When you shift gears, there's again. In fact, in some markets, almost they call it robotized manual gearboxes. It's like a robot doing the work for you. So it's a fully manual gearbox with a kit added on to it, right? And interestingly, you can add the whole kit or you can add half the kit, like Hyundai and Kia did with the IMT, right? So the clutch was automated, but the gears shifter you had to change. So I would say an AMT and an IMT are sort of both the same kind of gearboxes. The IMT being a halfway to the AMT. it's very clear, Hormazd, that, there's a cost benefit here because you're using something that is mass produced, a manual gearbox. You're adding on these little solenoids to it to sort of automate it with a sort of, computer control to it. What is the cost benefit though? I mean, or rather, how much?
I think actually there are two reasons why I think Maruti looked at the AMT, and there were the two kind of big hurdles for automatics. In what was a very price-sensitive market then, I don't think it's so price-sensitive now. People have become more value-sensitive, willing to spend for a little bit more convenience, a little bit more better driving feel, which, I think in terms of the quality of the shift on an AMT just is probably the worst.
True.
It can't be as good as...
it's solenoids doing what, your humans...
So I think the two advantages of the AMT were the cost and the fuel efficiency.
Right.
Because technically it is still a manual.
Still a manual.
There's no loss in terms of clutches slipping or hydraulics, an interface.
Exactly.
In the case of the, let's say the torque converter or belt slippage in terms of the CVT, that sort of thing. So I think in terms of efficiency, technically it's as good as the manual version. And of course, there's a cost benefit.
Right.
And of course, it was localized. So Magneti Marelli really came in at that time, localized the whole automatic part of it, which then piggybacked on an existing manual gearbox, which in any case was localized.
Right.
So I think it got the cost benefit over there. And if you look at it, I think in some cases, Maruti in their cheapest cars, I think the Delta is only around 50,000. In others, it's a lot more. So I think, if we go from 6-speed manual to 6-speed AMT, it might go to 70,000-80,000. As in the case of, let's say, the Mahindras, which there are, the 3XO, for example. The 1.2 naturally, the 1.2 engine that there is. So I think, so that really has been the big advantage.
Correct. But also, Hormazd, while there is a cost advantage to this, there is a sort of very interesting sort of trivia bit here. There was a Lamborghini, I'm forgetting which one, which also had an AMT, right?
The Aventador.
The Aventador, right.
I mean, how could you forget that? The horrible. And, there's again, there's a history to that. I think Lamborghini at that time, when they were developing the Aventador, aren't doing as well as they were today. Yes, they were part of the Volkswagen group and all that. But clearly, there was a certain budget. So at that time, Lamborghini could either invest or put the development money in a carbon fiber tub or a dual clutch gearbox, which now the Revueltors got after, over whatever, 12, 15 years after, or 12 years after the Aventador was out. The Huracan got it, of course, but the Aventador went on with that single clutch, which went on. And I don't think it was totally by choice, while the company says, it gives you that great feel and very
feel the jerk,
and you can feel the jerk more than a jerk. You think you get a shock to your spine every time you upshift and downshift. But it was, I think, that time, from what I understand, a budget issue. So really, carbon fiber tub, which they went for, or let's say getting, let's say a top end dual clutch gearbox. So yeah, I think that also was an AMT. I mean, we've had some Fiats which you've had over here.
Yes,
so
the Abarth.
The Abarths with an AMT really wasn't great. I'm not a fan of the AMT at all, but I think what it's important to do for people who don't know better, getting into driving for the first time, it serves the purpose.
Right.
And I think it just does the job because AMTs have got better and better.
Yeah.
It's all to do with the programming, the calibration and the fine tuning, to get those peaks and troughs as smooth as possible. Because don't forget, you get that particular head nod in an AMT, which can be quite annoying. It's really how you taper off, let's say the power delivery between shifts, because you've got other challenges, you've got emissions to meet. So, power also, the way, let's say the injection is calibrated, it all kind of is, has to be one sort of whole holistic system, which is very difficult for engineers because, if you get a smooth shift, it might be that your emissions have become an issue because you're fueling a lot more. So I think there are a lot of challenges over there. But I think AMTs have definitely got better and better. I think they're a lot smoother. I mean, I particularly like the Extra one, which is the Hyundai Extra, which I think is really one of the best AMTs for those ones over there. And but yeah, I think above a certain category, I think people will reject it. And I think that's where let's say, cars like the Baleno and even the Glanza, which gave up at that time, which was a CVT before, have gone to AMT. I think that is really a step down because whatever you say, the Baleno and Glanza, which are slightly premium hatches, I think expectations are quite higher over there and should have had, let's say, a better automatic option, which now they don't have. But I guess, there are a lot of other compunctions. There's costs, which is the main one. There's efficiency, which is again important for cafe, that sort of thing. But I think AMTs, really the common denominator, have really democratized automatic transmissions, which are up to about 30% right now.
Yes.
Yeah, 30% of all car sales being automatic. That is amazing, from being about maybe under 10%.
8%, yeah,
exactly.
about in 2018.
And I think the AMT has played a large role in kind of really making automatics more and more widespread.
True. And so that's AMTs, and maybe a handy tip for people who drive AMTs. If you want it to be smoother, don't keep the throttle pinned when there's a shift. Sort of just lift off, you'll find the shift is smoother. But having spoken about that, one of the shifts, let's also discuss the IMT, which is like the halfway house. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I find it very confusing.
It is a bit confusing, and frankly, it's been kind of rejected by consumers because they are it is confusing. It is likely that actually that's technically the cheapest option.
Yeah, right.
But it's the cheapest. Well, it's still 2 pedal, but you still have to shift. Yeah. So clearly, that's it. I think again, if you see the delta in price, I think it's about maybe just 60,000,
right,
or maybe less between, let's say, an equivalent.
Correct.
MT and IMT, which is, to explain, is basically a semi-automatic where you still have to shift, but you don't have to press a clutch. Now, Hyundai and Kia pioneered this. Obviously, Hyundai had it. I think Hyundai have stopped making them, right, or offering them. And now Kia is, the sense I get is Hyundai has dumped all the IMT models.
All the kits there.
Dumped all the kits onto Kia, so they have to sell them. But I don't think it's really clicked. And I think it also speaks of the aspiration of Indian consumers and buyers. They don't want half measures.
True.
They want a proper automatic, and for that the AMT is now the bare minimum.
Right. Correct. Yeah, absolutely, Hormazd. I think it's very clear. There's an AMT, and then of course your IMT is not there anymore. So I think we've spoken a lot about the AMTs. I was thinking let's move to the dual clutch transmission for the only reason because it's easier to maybe explain. So the dual clutch transmission, which I think Porsche invented probably back in the 80s in motorsport.
In racing,
In racing, correct.
PZK, whatever, I still can't get the name.
Yeah, I can't say it as well. We'll probably add a VO for that, the PDK. Doppelganger, something, whatever. But I mean, it's very interesting because it's in principle like a manual gearbox. So you have your input shaft with all the gears, you have your output shaft with all the gears.
Yeah.
Except that instead of one clutch, where you have to wait, you have dual clutches, right? You have two clutches. And so when you sort of selected one, the next gear is also already pre-selected. So yeah. So you have your odd and even gears on each shaft. So, it's in theory, it's a very good system. You've got a quicker shift, right? There's no pause, that head nod between the shifts. You've got the efficiency also because you're using, again,
exactly,
what is like a manual
proper clutch.
Yeah, and a proper clutch. But it's very complicated, right? I mean, we know also that the Volkswagen Group, I mean, they've had a lot of reliability issues with this dual clutch.
The DQ2, the DQ200, the 7-speed clutch. I mean, we all know a lot of guys had problems on it. We've reported about it also. I think fundamentally it was a dry clutch.
Right.
And I think there were issues of even say oil contamination. They had to change the grade of oil. There was a lot of wear, mechatronic issues with it. But again, it also went to show that, people, a dry clutch is a bit risky. Now, the advantage of a dry clutch is it is, of course, cheaper. That's one big let's say advantage. And it is simpler, but it's not necessarily more reliable. And I think that's why there was, even between Tata Motors, when they were going for a twin clutch, whether it's dry clutch, wet clutch, so for the twin clutch on the DCA, what they call
right.
So whether it's let's say twin dry clutch, wet clutch, they were kind of debating between the two. I think finally they went with the wet clutch. Mm-hmm. It's the Punch DT2, which is also on a lot of Stellantis cars. And I think the advantage of a wet clutch is, the whole, let's say the system is in an oil bath. So you get a lot more reliability. The only downside is, it's a bit more viscous, so a little bit more drag. And clearly, it's not as, let's say, technically as efficient. For the whole clutch being, let's say, in an oil bath, it's obviously reliability is a key issue over there. And I think that's what a lot of brands are doing in terms of, let's say, between the wet clutch and the dry clutch. I think the wet clutch is a safer option. That's what Tata Motors have done with the DC, which actually is a pretty decent twin clutch. I think it works quite well.
You drove that, right?
Yeah, that's right. Just drove it recently on the curved diesel. Worked quite well. And, it's, again, the upshifts are really smooth and seamless. You can't even feel them.
Yeah, it's already...
Yeah, it's just that, they have that little bit of delay like a lot of them do, So, again, it's all about calibration, that sort of thing. And, to me, nothing beats a torque converter for that sort of smoothness. Where you've got, let's say, the hydraulic fluid to buffer, between shifts and stuff like that. But I think on a sports car, there's nothing like a twin clutch.
Right.
Like even when you're driving, let's say fast or in terms of, let's say, sheer sportiness.
Right.
I think for enthusiasts, nothing like a twin clutch.
Yeah.
I remember driving the Kushak down all the way down Mahabaleshwar and really enjoying that DSG gearbox.
Yeah, you wrote about that as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And, even on the Cayman, that PDK is just unbelievable. It's just almost telepathic. So I think at that end, at the top end for the sport cars, twin clutch all the way.
Correct.
I mean, there are some cars with really good torque converters as well. Yeah, but I think twin clutch, to me, for the mass market, we've seen the trend. People are actually moving away from twin clutch and actually going towards torque converter.
Yeah, true. Exactly. I mean, exactly. You don't need that lightning quick shifts and things like that on a mass market car.
And even in terms of low speed driving, with the clutch engaging and not engaging,
true.
Whether it's in the AMT and to a lesser extent in the twin clutch, but there's still an engagement, though gears are pre-selected.
Yeah,
you do feel that interruption of power, so that absolute smoothness is not, say, like it would be in a torque converter and a CVT.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. In fact, even the hunting for gears, sometimes like we've reported very often, right, on Volkswagen groups, at the low speeds, it does trip up on which gear it should be in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. I think that's perfect. We should maybe discuss the next one, which is the torque converter, or we refer to it as torque converter, but maybe we should just, put it out there that, it's actually a planetary gearbox.
Yeah, exactly. And it's called an AT. Yeah. And in typical automatic, automatic transmission.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Like the OG automatic transmission,
True.
so to speak. They all call it an AT. There's
Exactly.
AMT and there's AT, there's DCT,
correct.
And there's CVT.
Yeah.
So these are the transmissions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, it's in fact, even I like the system because it's a very simple system actually. And as an automatic, it's a sun and planetary gear. It's hard to explain it, here, but we'll have some animations up as well. The gearbox construction is completely different. There's no input shaft, output shaft, and constant meshing. It's just sun gear, planetary gears around them, and then depending on which gear you stop and which way you rotate them, you get the sort of torque multiplication happening. Interestingly, the word torque converter, and we were discussing this also with the team, actually comes from the clutch device. It's the device that separates the engine from the gearbox.
Right.
Is the torque converter, and the only reason we call it the torque converter is because it also multiplies torque by a fixed ratio, and then of course the gearbox does the wider multiplication.
There's hydraulic, there's
Exactly.
fluid in there. That's
So to simply put it, there's a input shaft, there's a fan, if you could imagine, like a table fan.
An impeller.
Like an impeller, and it's blowing oil in this case onto the another fan. In fact, in college, I remember they had set up a very simple thing: 2 table fans, turned one on, and said, look, now the other fan is moving. Right. And that's your automatic oil torque converter thing.
Only thing you've got oil in between.
Exactly. You've got oil in between instead of air, and it's a closed loop system. And in the torque converter, you have a stator in between, which sort of multiplies and makes more traction. So the benefits are obviously clear. There's a very smooth sort of power transmission. There's no shift shocks and things like that. The drawback is obviously, as you mentioned earlier, efficiency. Right?
They're expensive.
And they're expensive, exactly. The efficiency, the power transmission efficiency, not so great. And we know even from our fuel efficiency testing we have seen an AT like this, a planetary system or a torque converter.
Because
would have.
with that hydraulic, there are a lot of losses.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not as direct as something like
Exactly. And despite, of course, they do have a lockup now. I think all modern transmissions at high speed, but that's only at high speeds where, it's a lockup.
Sometimes even at low speeds, like we found in the 3XO, that lockup was a little too aggressive to start, so it felt a little, to give you that immediate response, maybe a bit too responsive. So I guess, again, it's the way you calibrate.
How you calibrate.
But again, coming to torque converters, I think, they are, what we've seen is they are more on the expensive side. So I think on average, they can be around 150,000 to 2 lakhs more than the equivalent MD. Manual, yeah. So that's what we've seen, and let's say in something like a Fortuner can even be more than 2 lakhs.
True.
So I think, that is the average which, we would see. But
is this also, Hormazd, because of the fact that they're not made here?
So none of them are made here. No DCT is made here.
Right.
No CVT is made here. We've not talked about CVTs made here, except for the AMT.
Right.
Because Magnati may have localized that. There's enough volume for that. And the gearbox itself is localized.
Yeah.
So the AMT is the only localized automatic gearbox, so to speak. There is no, we just don't have the volumes. And it's really a shame that after being a market with 4.2 million cars for passenger vehicles, we still don't have a localized automatic gearbox. From what I understand, Tata are looking at doing it with the Punch DT2. They might localize it. I think they're working on something like that. So, that could, I guess,
no chance of a torque converter.
No, I don't think there's a torque. And, we've got Aisin, which really, to me, is the Fiat multi-jet of gearboxes. Yeah. Because they supply to so many brands. Yeah. That 6-speed auto for transverse layout is just becoming ubiquitous. Yeah. So you've got Maruti, which has it. You've got in the Brezza.
Right.
You've got and in the Fronx. You've got Mahindra, which have it in the 3XO. You've got MG, which has it. You've got Volkswagen and Skoda, which have it. So it's there. And just a bit of a scoop, which not many know, but for some reason, Volkswagen and Skoda are stopping using what they call the AQ250, which is the Aisin gearbox in Europe. So that means they'll stop. We won't get supplied over here, and they're going to replace that with the AQ308F, which is an 8-speed torque converter for their cars over here, which is only with a 1-liter engine, not with a 1.5. So I don't know why they've done that. Maybe for better emission norms or whatever. But clearly that gearbox will have to come here. There'll be a big cost implication. So I don't know how they're going to figure that out. But yeah, imagine you'd be having, you could have, let's say cars like the Kushaq, Slavia, Taigun, Virtus with an 8-speed 1-liter auto. So anyway, that's just a
that's fantastic actually, Hormazd, because like we just discussed earlier, right? I mean, for a car of this application, this is the ideal gearbox, right? This is the ideal gearbox. So you don't.
No, it is, and if you look at it, Volkswagen moved from a DCT to this gearbox for a small capacity turbo petrol. I mean, the earlier 1.2 had a 7-speed DCT.
Right.
Now this 1-liter has a 6-speed torque converter, the Aisin torque converter. Yeah. So clearly, I think it's torque converters are also fighting back. I think they're becoming more efficient. So as you said, minimizing losses, with clutches and stuff like that internally. So I think they are becoming a lot more efficient. But again, for that ultimate efficiency, things like DCTs and all are a lot more better that way. That's one of the reasons why I think even Tata has chosen it. Tata Motors, they want that efficiency again with CAFE and all that. You want to squeeze out as much efficiency as you can. But I think a torque converter is the good old traditional gearbox.
What the Americans love. I think they call it the slush box.
They're no longer slush boxes. I mean, they're no far. The only one it's a bit of a slush box is in the Compass, that 9-speed. The auto is very, very lazy. Very kind of lazy shifts. But I think, again, that's more tuned for certain off-road requirements and, that kind of environment in which it's been designed to operate. But yeah, and I think, you had, there's been an arms race as far as gear ratios go. So you had 9-speed on, let's say on the Compass. Now even the Merc have 9 speeds. But again, we had a 10-speed with the Endeavour,
Yes.
which has gone right now. So maybe, when it comes back, we might get it back again.
True. So the let's say actually let me just ask you one more thing. Hormazd, on the gearbox with Volkswagen doing this now, right? Do you think that they will localize this because it's on volume car?
We don't have the volumes. I mean, they have ideal.
So it's still not the volumes.
Absolutely not. I mean, you need, I think, for gearbox, it's a very highly capital intensive kind of a business. And also, when ICE is fading out, for anyone now to invest in a gearbox plant, it doesn't make sense. I don't know. They say ICE is fading out. Customers have voted otherwise. Consumers have voted otherwise. But, you're in this phase that 2024, I don't think anyone invest in a full gearbox facility over here unless they see a good 10, 15 years, because it'd be a lot of payback for that investment. And you need, let's say, volumes of 250, 300,000 to really kind of...
Off the gearbox.
Off the gearbox, yeah. So, and, got everyone to get... So, I think ICIN could and should. I don't know what they're thinking. Maybe they would find that volume, that critical mass to localize, because that gearbox is being used by a lot of brands. Yeah. So that could give them the scale and the volume, but no immediate plans right now to do that. Yeah.
True. Great. So, Hormazd, let's then move on to CVTs, right? Continuously variable transmissions. I think that's a transmission that's also very smooth in that sense, I mean, apart from you don't like them.
Oh, it's very boring.
The rubber band effect.
that constant high revs kind of a thing.
Right.
So,
right. True. Yeah. But it's interesting because they too seem to be making like a comeback, CVTs. Nissan are not giving up on them. They are constantly refining the CVTs, they are at it. And it too, just to explain, it's, to everyone, it's a very simple system. Again, it's a system of two pulleys. I mean, we say pulleys because that's the concept, but they're actually inverted cones, where a belt runs between them. And
give seamless ratio.
Yeah. And then you just vary the ratio. The belt travels higher or lower on the cone. So as it goes higher or as it goes lower, the diameter changes.
Right.
And
very simple system.
Simple system. I mean, I remember the first time I saw one was on a scooter. I think the Kinetic Honda. I can't remember correctly because there was a centrifugal clutch. Even the clutch was also a simple clutch. It just had a sort of weights, and as you accelerated, the shoes expanded, centrifugal force, and it engaged the drive, and so very, very simple system, but it works. It's used on cars. Of course, you don't have a rubber belt. I think in the Nissan systems, they use a steel belt.
Yeah.
But the rubber band effect, in fact, just to explain, we've got a lot of queries coming in as to why is that rubber band effect there. I mean, that's really because, as your engine revs rise, you hear it, but there is some belt slippage.
Yeah, so you don't get that correstanding.
Yeah, it's yet to rise up in the cones.
Right.
So as it's rising up in the cones, there is a delay, and you don't hear, it's not sinking.
But again, CVTs have also come a long way, and I think over here, our long-term Creta,
right?
We
all love that.
CVT. We just love that. I mean, it's probably the best CVT that there is, and again, they mimic gear shifts by pre-programmed ratios.
You stop the belt at certain points.
Yeah, exactly. True. And you can use paddle shifters. So again, I think each transmission is fighting back to make the drive feel as natural or as entertaining as possible. And I think probably that's where the CVT really, has a challenge. It doesn't give you that kind of engagement. It's the most boring of transmissions. But again, in stop-start traffic, it is actually phenomenal. There's nothing better than that, really. Yeah. Because that linearity you get is just superb.
Just so smooth.
Exactly. So I think over there, the torque converter and the CVT, I think the CVT more in absolute stop-and-go traffic.
Correct.
So,
versus the planetary torque converter.
Exactly. That also is a thing. But I think why I like the torque converter is you've got the smoothness and it feels quite natural as well. The way it shifts, you can feel it, that sort of thing.
In fact, while we're talking stop-start, just to clear also maybe a misnomer. In fact, a lot of people keep saying, a lot of so-called auto experts, they keep saying, and I've seen them put this out, that a CVT doesn't have a clutch. I mean, you have to have a clutch to disengage the engine and the transmission. So if you've read that elsewhere, that isn't technically accurate because there is some sort of clutch device. It may be different. So you could have a centrifugal clutch. You could have, in fact, some cars use a torque converter. So you have a torque converter functioning as a clutch in a CVT.
Right.
In fact, I think Honda used that, or you could even have a planetary gearbox with its wet clutch, which, stops the thing to function as a clutch. So you can do various ways, but you have to have some sort of clutch device. It may not look like the traditional diaphragm clutch, which you have in the manual.
Yeah.
So I guess a lot of auto people confuse it saying, oh, the CVT doesn't have a clutch. They have clutches. They have torque converter clutches. They could have a planetary gearbox used as a clutch. So that's just to clear the misnomer, for the...
Yeah, and the other thing is, I think we should talk about the cost again, because clearly what we've seen is, if you see our charts, we've been trying to do a study on what is the delta or the difference between manual
to the auto.
To the automatic. Yeah. I think with the CVT, it's about between 1.2 and 1.5 lakhs. So again,
also
an expensive gearbox. Again, they are all imported, not locally made over here. So I think in terms of, let's say, price or cost, I think you've got torque converter, most expensive, maximum difference between petrol and between manual and the torque converter auto. Interestingly, then you have just the DCT, which is actually, especially the dry clutch units are relatively cheap, though they are quite sophisticated units.
Right.
And then you have the AMT and of course the IMT at the bottom. So that's really the hierarchy in terms of
the cost.
Yeah. And it's very interesting. I think Hyundai and Kia, one company that have got all the gearboxes. Really hats off to them. They've given every possible choice.
Exactly.
You've got an IMT, they've got an AMT, you've got a CVT, you've got a DCT, and with the diesels, you've got the torque converter. It's just amazing. And I think that's really...
I mean, with an EV Hormazd, you can even add, they have the reduction gear.
Yeah, that's true. We forgot the EV, which is the best automatic.
Exactly.
We've not talked about that.
Exactly. There is no, just for everyone out there, with an EV, there is no technically a gearbox.
Yeah.
Other than the Porsche Taycan and Audi, you use a two-speed, right?
That's right.
You just have a reduction gear because EV motors spin
very high.
Yeah, too fast. But yeah, so that's an automatic.
Yeah, you get full torque from zero, so you don't need that gearbox to multiply that. So exactly, so you've got these multiple gearboxes. I think it's quite fascinating that Hyundai, Kia have given all of them. So that's it's quite
almost all. There's the eCVT.
Oh yes, the eCVT.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
CVT technically, but there's an eCVT.
Yeah.
That I think works well with the hybrids, doesn't it?
It does, Hormazd. In fact, interestingly, eCVT, it's electronically, or electrical, some call them. It's actually very funny because it's not really a CVT. Technically it's not a CVT at all. There is no belt and pulley system. It's actually a planetary setup that you have in the torque converters. But they use the planetary setup and don't provide any fixed ratios. And you can set up a planetary gearbox to function with an infinite ratio.
Right.
So they set it up. It's really, really technical, to explain all of this. But you can do that. So that's what a eCVT is. In fact, it's really sad that, sometimes marketing sort of corrupts technical terms. Right. But it's actually a planetary gearbox which has been set up to provide infinite ratios. And therefore, the marketing folks thought, hey, it's just easier to call it than a CVT or an eCVT. And yeah, like you said, it's a setup used in hybrids where you need this setup because of the electric motor also providing an input, the engine also providing an input, sometimes independently, sometimes together, and so the planetary setup works the best for this sort of setup. And I guess that would be the best automatic gearbox, or probably not. And let's say from a driving point of view, Hormazd, what would you?
I think for me, obviously, DCTs are the best from an absolute sports car point of view. But
performance,
performance point of view. But if you ask me, which is my all-time, my best gearbox, I think is the ZF 8-speed auto.
Right.
The longitudinal gearbox. So basically for rear-wheel drive cars.
Correct.
They're in the JAGs and the BMWs. It is, I think, just class act.
Yeah. So for everyone, that's the torque converter.
It's a torque converter.
That's planetary setup. Yeah.
So the 8-speed ZF is really phenomenal. Interestingly, the 9-speed ZF, which is for, let's say, transverse layouts like in the Evoque and Velar and stuff like that, just doesn't have the same kind of the feel. It's not as smooth. I think maybe it's to do with the way it's packaged or whatever. So the internal components are very different. But clearly, I think for me, the ZF 8-speed is the best gearbox for me right now.
Right.
Of course, you've got the PDKs, but overall, as for being a daily driver and sporty and everything, that really is the best one.
True. Yeah, I think absolutely same here. I would prefer a planetary torque converter setup any day, just because it's also been around for so long that it's actually reliable. Today it's quite a reliable gearbox compared to, let's say, dual clutch. or even an AMT, which we say is cheap because it's localized, but I changed the gear kit, the automated kit, all the solenoids on my dad's Celerio. It was about 60,000 rupees. So technically, it's not that cheap, So if you're going, I think you might as well go with a proper gearbox, smooth, and stuff like that. Yeah, you might pay some bit in fuel efficiency bills, but I mean, you're buying an automatic also because you want the convenience, right? So that's where I stand. But so Hormazd, same here. I mean, I would also pick a torque converter, planetary gearbox as the ideal one. I fully agree. Just the smoothest one around. But before we end, let's also pick the worst one. Like, that's the best, which is the worst sort of automatic gearbox, according to you.
I think it was that AMT on the Quanto.
Oh, God.
The Mahindra Quanto, which Ricardo did.
That.
It was just horrific. I mean, we panned that gearbox in our review. I mean, we literally called it a joke. And I think for the first time, at that time, Pawan Goenka said, you've been a bit harsh with this. That guy said, but it was really terrible. I think Mahindra themselves, they just couldn't figure it. I think Ricardo were doing that development, and they just didn't have the know-how. It's very complex, to get the calibration, to just, to get the response, just to. So I think it was a total mess.
On the Quanto and the
one more.
One more, right? I remember driving one of them, and I remember they said it has creep mode, and I was like, no, this is leap mode.
Yeah, exactly. Suddenly lost. Yeah, nothing happens. It suddenly engages, and on a slope while I was reversing, you literally get wheel spin also. So it is quite. So I think that's
the worst.
Yeah.
But for you,
I think overall, just to wrap up, I think automatics become, let's say, in certain segments they are 100%. In certain segments they are more than 50%. And overall 30% and growing. I think what pulls the overall percentage down are the mass market cars with large volumes. But in certain segments and above, I think automatics 50% and more. So clearly, I think the convenience of having one, especially in today's driving and environment, is something that we can't do without. So anyway, I think that's it. Thanks, Sergius. Great insights, great technical explanation. And thanks to all of you also for tuning in. Don't forget to tune in every Saturday at 11 a.m. And to keep yourself reminded, don't forget to subscribe. You will get a notification. So see you again, same time next week.